Well, welcome to the Friday edition of the Daily Dose Devotion. I'm Pastor Eric of Evident Life Church. Title of today's Daily Dose, Are You Discouraged? You know, at times we can all feel the pressure of discouragement. Maybe things aren't happening the way that we'd hoped. My career isn't progressing. My finances are in trouble. My marriage isn't what I thought it would be. My kids aren't honoring me and they're not following Jesus. My health is suffering. I got COVID. Now that is true. I got COVID. I feel like our nation, how about this for discouragement? I feel like our nation's being hijacked by power-hungry progressives bent on destroying democracy, bent on ripping apart the family and silencing the church. Or maybe discouragement is creeping up in your life just because you're getting tired. The dictionary says this about discouragement. Discouragement is to be deprived of confidence, hope, or spirit. It is to be hampered or deterred. It is to be deprived of the will to persist in something. Discouragement. It can be real. So what do we do? How do we respond to this enemy called discouragement? Do we flee? Do we run away? Do we throw in the towel, just give up and quit? Well, before I continue, let me say this very clearly. As God's children, we don't have to give discouragement the time of day because discouragement can be defeated. Amen? Discouragement can be defeated. Have you noticed that when we feel attacked on the outside, it often creates discouragement on the inside, makes us want to give up? Well, hey, this happened to the Israelites. We're not the first ones to feel this or to experience this. The Israelites, they were building that wall. Remember, we're talking about the wall, Nehemiah. We're looking at Ezra, Nehemiah, the Chronicles, to kind of lead us into awakening in our nation. Well, check out what happened to the Israelites. It's found in Nehemiah 4, verse 10. It says this, "Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall." God's precious, victorious, blessed people began to feel overwhelmed, and this was leading to discouragement. They were losing sight of their goal, their calling, because they were having troubles. And mainly they were having trouble seeing past the dirt and the debris of life. And we too, you and I, we can fall into this same trap and lose sight of God's calling on our lives when we just have too much junk in our lives. Maybe this is why the writer of Hebrews said, hey, quote, let us throw off everything that hinders. In other words, let us throw off that junk, throw off the cares of the world, throw off the garbage and the sin that so easily entangles. That's Hebrews 12:1. So how do we throw off worry and discouragement? Well, we got to replace it with something else. Look, we have to replace the worry with worship. And when I'm talking about worship, I'm talking about worshiping God, lifting up His name over our lives, reminding ourselves that God is on the throne. Come on now, that we are His people and He is our God. How do we get rid of worry and discouragement? By reminding ourselves that if God is for us, then who or what can ever come against us? Here's how Nehemiah responded to discouragement. Nehemiah 4, verse 14 says, "After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome." Look at that. Remember the Lord. How do you fight it? Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and then fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. The people of God needed to be reminded that God and what He had promised were yes and amen. Despite all the noise around, despite all the chaos happening when they were trying to build that wall, they needed to be reminded that nothing really changed. God is still God, and they are still His people, and their mission is still the mission that God gave them. And when they're walking in God's will and in His mission, they're going to find victory. Look, the enemy wants us to think that everything has changed. The enemy wants us to think that the world's fallen apart, everything's changed, but we got to remember this. God is still God, and His plans for our lives, for the church, and even for our nation are the same. The Israelites, get back to them, they'd already built half the wall. Yet they were discouraged. I mean, half the wall, that was a huge accomplishment, but the enemy was getting in there and discouraging them. So when you're down, I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask you to turn your attention from discouragement and turn your attention to the one who's able to do something about it. See, God has been faithful to you in the past. Come on, look at it. Look at your life. Look at where you are now. But by the grace of God, oh my, right? God has been faithful to you in the past. He's faithful to you today. And he has promised to be faithful to you in the future. So church, let's remember the Lord. Let's remember his promises. Let's remember his goodness. Let's remember his power. Let's fight for our families, for our neighbors, for our nation. And our God is great. He is awesome. We're going to remember him, and we're going to continue to build our lives his way. How about that for going into the weekend? Have a blessed weekend, and I'll see you on Sunday.